Shapes of Enlightenment and Creative Education Language, The Architecture of Feeling. Preface. This is not a book of poems, but of the emotional architecture of poetry. It is a field of patterns, a rhythm of thought forms designed to hold the invisible and the visible. Each pattern is a structure built from clarity, softened by emotion, reinforced by quiet truths with a gentle presence. They are not meant to be solved, but inhabited, walked through, lingered within. This is a place where ideas have weight, where silence has shape, where your breath can press against the beams of meaning and feel them hold. You are not asked to understand, you are invited to resonate. This book of poetry listens back. Pattern, the load-bearing thought. I, the first beam. A decision is not merely fleeting, it is the quiet act of architecture. Consequently, it becomes a structure formed not with stone, but with the subtle material of intention. It is measured in emotional tension, therefore shaped by the pressure of values. Engineered by reflective force and tempered by contemplation, it holds itself upright, balanced beneath invisible weight. 2. Time's resistance. We do not experience time as a straight line, rather we register it as resistance. The tension in our thoughts creates friction against unfolding moments. Thus, pressure builds in the mind's beams, signaling those precise places where perception intersects with consequence. Furthermore, it is within this intersection that emotion reveals itself as the silent physics of choice. 3. The reinforced past. The past does not disappear, it becomes the very skeleton of our present. Consequently, it holds within it a blueprint, not meant to be erased, but reinterpreted through new understanding. It is reinforced not with nostalgia, but with clarified purpose. Therefore, healing begins not by forgetting, but by building again with stronger intent stripped of illusion. I4, the curve of limits. Limitlessness, while romanticized, is a myth. True freedom is born within the shape of form. Therefore, artistry itself arises from constraint. In resisting all boundaries, we eliminate the lines that give shape to expression. Consequently, it is structure, curved by discipline, that becomes the vessel through which vision manifests. Verse still standing clarity. To think is to construct. To feel is to stress test the frame. And to heal in turn is to reinforce the emotional scaffolding. Thus, clarity becomes something more than thought. It becomes a load-bearing presence. It does not float in abstraction. Instead, it stands firm, resolute, and undeniable. Pattern, emotional mass index. I, invisible gravity. Emotions are not abstract. They possess mass. Therefore, every feeling becomes a physical presence within us. It accumulates quietly in the architecture of thought. Slouching toward closure or standing in unfinished tension, our emotional posture becomes a record of what remains unresolved. 2. Trajectory of feeling. Heavier feelings distort direction. For instance, grief bends trajectory while joy lifts inertia. Consequently, every choice becomes a derivative of internal gravity. Therefore, what we call free will is often an orbit around feeling, spiraling toward equilibrium. 3. Calibration without judgment. This is not a tool for domination, but for precision. To name the weight of emotion is not to label it as weakness. Rather, it becomes a calibration method so that we may lift what burdens us without collapsing under it. Thus, emotional awareness transforms into emotional engineering, IFE, caring differently. People bear their experiences with distinct architecture. Some drag their pasts with wordless effort. Others camouflage burden through acceleration. Consequently, comparisons are unwise without recognizing the differing frames beneath each structure. Empathy, therefore, becomes an act of perception before evaluation. The honest frame. True balance is not numbness, it is honest engineering. Resilience is not forged through force, but formed through integrity. Therefore, emotional strength becomes an invisible scaffolding built by understanding what you carry and how you carry it. Pattern, the shape of response. The silent curve. A response is not a sound, it is a contour, shaped silently in the interstice between thought and restraint. It curves inward like a rib arching to protect. Consequently, a response is an emotional architecture, structured to endure. 2. Built in quiet. Reactions shout. Responses are crafted. They arise, therefore, not from impulse, but from the quiet algebra of perception aligning with necessity. This makes the response a form of craftsmanship, a calibration between what is felt and what is expressed. 3. The sculpted choice. To respond is not to release pressure, but to mold it into form. Pressure is not wasted, it becomes material. Therefore, when sculpted thoughtfully, it bears the load without breaking the frame. The response, then, is an act of design rather than defense. Ivor's softening stone. Even the hardest impressions may soften with witness. When met with awareness, the sharp edge becomes round. Therefore, choice transforms into design, like stone under chisel, when offered the presence of intention. What once cut may now curve, light through structure. What you say is never just sound, it is structure. Each phrase is a beam, a span, an extension of your emotional blueprint. Consequently, let your response be engineered with strength and laced with gentleness, capable of carrying weight while letting the light pass through. Pattern, calibration field. Variable ratios. Presence has no standard formula. Each moment, therefore, demands its own unique ratio between thinking and feeling, restraint and release, distance and resonance. Calibration becomes the soft science of presence tuned to now. 2. Quiet attunement. Precision is not rigidity, it is sensitive alignment. Consequently, it becomes the art of knowing when to yield and when to assert. This act of withholding distortion, of tuning the signal without overpowering the frame, is a form of mindful grace. 3. The emission principle. You do not simply exist, you broadcast. Your field is tuned to what you allow, shaped by what you absorb. Consequently, what you receive from others is rarely more than what you emit toward yourself. Calibration, therefore, is a reciprocal architecture of tone. Mismatched static, noise isn't always audible. Sometimes it's the residue of mismatched frequencies, internal signals overriding external needs. Therefore, the dissonance is emotional static, the reverberation of a misaligned field seeking coherence. The tuned presence. A powerful presence is not broadcast in volume but in clarity. Consequently, to calibrate is to listen deeply, to sense proportion, and to remain true in form. In doing so, you become not a loudspeaker, but a resonator, quiet and unmistakably clear. Pattern, the overcorrection. I, the tightened dial. Overcorrection masquerades as refinement. In truth, it is panic dressed in precision. Consequently, it turns the dial beyond center, attempting to mend what may not have been broken in the first place. It does not fix, it distorts. 2. The illusion of accuracy. Fear wears the cloak of diligence. We double check, then overdo. We silence noise, then erase signal. Therefore, control becomes confusion. When rooted in fear, even precision can shatter stability. 3. Self as performer. What began as tuning devolves into performance. The self, now contorted, assumes roles the world did not require. Consequently, it abandons its original tone, sacrificing resonance for acceptability. IV. Anxious adjustment. Correction is essential, overcorrection is reaction without reference. It is movement mistaken for progress, precision mistaken for safety. Therefore, it recalibrates in a vacuum, disconnected from the source. V. Stillness restored. Wisdom emerges in pause. It knows when to adjust and when to hold. To stay still as the mirror bends is to trust the return of the original signal. Therefore, clarity is not found in the spin, but in the still axis around which it tilts. Pattern, the residual thread. I, the imprint. Not all experiences end with time, rather, some continue as invisible threads stretched across behavior like fine tensile filaments. Consequently, they leave behind subtle pressure marks in the clay of our intentions, traces not of trauma, but of continued relevance. These imprints shape the way we move forward, even when we believe we've let go. 2. Hidden frameworks. These remnants are not open wounds, nor are they loud declarations of loss. Instead, they manifest as resonance trails, subtle curvatures in posture or patterns of speech. Therefore, they become emotional scaffolding still in use, silently determining how we carry ourselves within relationships, choices, and memory. 3. Suspended note. The afterform of an experience lingers like a note still suspended after the melody has paused, and consequently, it influences our next breath, our next tone, even if we've forgotten the original song. This suspended resonance does not require remembering, it only needs to be recognized. IV, false intuition. When we fail to identify these lingering threads, we often mistake them for instinct. Yet what seems like inner knowing is sometimes just calibration drift, a slight slant introduced by untraced memory. Consequently, decisions emerge not from present wisdom, but from undigested past events replaying themselves in disguise. V. Standing inside. To integrate the residue is to stand still within it without the need to scrub it away. Thus, healing becomes a reconfiguration rather than a rejection. We learn to let past tension become a part of current architecture, sturdy, useful, and finally honest, without distorting the emotional signal. Pattern, the hollow that carries form. I, the negative mold. All structure begins not with material, but with the space left intentionally untouched. Therefore, the hollow becomes the unspoken invitation, a sculpted absence that allows something else to arrive. This is not a lack, but a blueprint of welcome. 2. Breathwork of meaning. Absence is not nothingness. On the contrary, It is the deliberate rhythm that allows meaning to breathe. Just as a sentence needs pauses to speak clearly, so too must design honor silence. Consequently, stillness becomes a form of articulation. 3. Vessel logic. A cup holds because it does not insist. Design, therefore, is an act of subtraction, offering form not through dominance, but through understanding what must remain open. Thus, the hollow is not a void, but a cradle for emergence. Unfilled pressure. We often misinterpret silence as emptiness. However, silence hums with containment. When we rush to fill the void too soon, it becomes a kind of fear, a defense against feeling. Therefore, the unspoken becomes a sanctuary for truth too subtle to be declared outright. The interior light. Let your structures breathe. Let the gaps remain intentional. Every presence casts a shape, yet it's the invisible interior, the untouched light within, that offers the clarity to be seen through. Consequently, your form becomes not just presence, but portal, pattern, the return of resonance. Soft emergence. You don't need to rush your return. The first tone of re-entry arrives slowly, like morning stretching its way through closed eyelids. Consequently, coherence is regained not with urgency, but with a gentle readiness that carries no sharp edges. 2. The listening residue. Stillness, once inhabited, leaves a shape in your perception. It is not the absence of sound, but the echo of alignment. Therefore, this phantom curve teaches you how to begin again, not by recreating, but by allowing what remains to find new meaning. 3. Architecture of first light. When resonance returns, it does so without fanfare. It gathers softly in corners, filling the room like vapor until presence becomes undeniable. Thus, it reminds you that you were never truly disconnected, only waiting to tune in again. For a re-entry spiral. To emerge is not to perform. You are not being watched, you are being revealed. Consequently, every breath becomes a spiral, a slow rethreading of self into story, woven not with proof but with presence. The inheritance of the unspoken. You do not return empty-handed. From the hollow you honored, you bring back a gift, clarity without certainty, energy without urgency, and a whispering presence that no longer strives to prove itself. Therefore, what you embody becomes resonance itself. Pattern, coherence in the quiet current, Atlantean breathwork. To be known, you do not need to speak. There are deeper frequencies beneath your posture, ancestral light signatures carried in your way of being. Consequently, those tuned to truth will recognize your essence without translation, without noise. 2. The rhythm that revives. Your breath is bread, your thoughts are thread. Therefore, your softest awareness becomes a weaving force, restoring others not with effort, but with harmonic presence. Thus, your coherence is contagious, your being quietly instructional. 3. Dream frame of functionality. You are not lost in the dream, you are the one who holds its shape. Even within fantasy, you are the functional container, the architecture that stabilizes rhythm when the world's code begins to scatter. Therefore, you become the spine of the dream's logic. For the whisper of non-fiction light, this isn't mythology, it's elegant self-help embedded in the surreal. Every motion you make teaches the environment how to remember itself. Consequently, your fantasy becomes a field of practical harmony, guiding the atmosphere back into coherence. V. The shadow of Zen. Your softness is not absence of power, it is refinement of presence. The rhythm that emerges from this quiet is not a lack of motion, but mastery of it. Therefore, you become the poem of prevention, the signal of balance, the song that calms the interruption before it begins. Pattern, the reverbical. I, the chamber you didn't know you were building. Each unfinished thought echoes within you, not as noise, but as curved presence. Consequently, what you withheld becomes architecture, a structure for self-return built from your unsaid truths. Thus, the reverbical isn't a place, it's a pattern of reflection. 2. Bend time and breathing walls. Inside this chamber, past perceptions arrive on delay, not to haunt, but to offer re-listening. Time folds, walls breathe, and moments expand gently. Consequently, contrast softens and your memory becomes more space than sentence. 3. Listening backward to move forward. Here, response is not required. You listen in reverse. Emotion reorganizes itself, untangled from narrative. Consequently, thought realigns because the shape of the chamber allows for its unwinding. I-4. Coherence without interference. The reverbical demands nothing. It holds no mirrors, only folds them inward. Therefore, it reflects your gravity, not as critique, but as quiet affirmation. Consequently, you emerge balanced, luminous from within. V. Living in the slow return. This is restoration as geometry, a slowed curvature where your own thoughts, finally recognized, greet you with acceptance. Consequently, you are witnessed not by others, but by your own resonance returning without judgment, without noise. Pattern, the memory keeper. I, River Archive. Memory does not confine itself to recollection. It ripples through the posture of presence. Therefore, not all remembrance lives in the mind. Some recollections live in temperature shifts between gestures, in micropauses between expressions. Consequently, this is where she keeps them, in the current of stillness that carries everything you thought you forgot. 2. The soft historian. She records not with ink, but through feeling. Furthermore, her memory is not for replaying, but for recognizing when a familiar energy returns in new form. Consequently, her role is not that of a narrator, but of a sacred pattern noticer, gently reminding you of what you once felt before you knew how to speak it. 3. Unspoken tributaries. Emotions often move underground, and she traces their hidden flow. Therefore, her map is made of timing, not territory, of the way silence lingers after words depart. Consequently, truth becomes a pattern not of language, but of echo duration. IV, weightless time. In her presence, the past becomes fluid. She does not anchor it, but allows it to arrive when it is ready to be heard differently. Consequently, memory becomes a soft visitor, not a chain, but a guest whose hands are empty. The offering of the archive. She never demands narrative. She requests only honesty. Consequently, in her mirror, memory transforms from burden to belonging, revealing that the water you feared was actually home returning to welcome you again. Pattern, the serene builder, eye, lattice of droplets. She builds not with force, but with what falls. Raindrops become beams, condensation becomes code. Consequently, her design is born from gentleness, not conquest from what is gathered, not extracted. 2. Emotional architecture. Her spaces have no sharp corners. They curve gently, designed not to contain power, but to hold emotion. Therefore, she does not trap what's tender. Instead, she shelters what others discard. Her walls are made of refuge, not defense. 3. Blueprints in reflection. She does not draft with lines, but with ripples. Consequently, her plans emerge through reflections, responding to the natural tendencies of emotion. She listens to what water already wants to become, and only then decides on form. Ivor, the quiet reinforcement. Stillness is her scaffolding, and quiet is her brace. Consequently, the more serene she becomes, the stronger the structure holds. Her architecture does not need assertion, it grows from the internal weight of trust. V. Living aqueducts. Her purpose is nourishment, not recognition. Therefore, what she creates continues to drip with the memory of her kindness long after she's gone. Her legacy is the fluid continuity of care. Pattern, the reflective garden. I, emotional soil. This garden does not grow vegetables or flowers, it grows realizations. Consequently, the more honest your presence, the deeper its roots can reach. It does not respond to perfection, only sincerity. 2. Mirror pools. Reflection here is not a tool for judgment, but a hydration of awareness. Therefore, stillness in this space becomes an invitation to see what blooms when looked upon with grace instead of critique. 3. Thought as rain. Every idea arrives like rainfall. Some gather in pools, others evaporate. But those that soak deeply into the emotional soil become fruit over time. Consequently, thoughts are not wasted, they transform. I4. Tending the growth. You do not command growth here, you water it. You allow it light, you honor its need for shadow. Consequently, revelation arrives not through force, but through continual nourishment. V. Harvest without ownership. You may forget what you planted. You may not recognize the moment of blossoming, but one day, without effort, you'll taste something unexpectedly sweet, and you will know it came from your tending. Pattern, the chamber of harmonic return. I, the inner echo. This chamber hums not in volume, but in resonance, like water vibrating through bone. Consequently, it does not deliver answers. It returns you to your unfiltered tone, the one you lost trying to adjust. 2. Tuning through listening. To hear yourself clearly, you must stop filling the air. This chamber offers that space. Consequently, what begins as absence becomes soul recognition, signal regathered, refined, and reintegrated. 3. Drip logic. Wisdom doesn't arrive in shouts, it accumulates in drips. Consequently, it becomes clear only after you realize you've been collecting it all along. Knowledge here is cumulative stillness. I4. Circular reentry. Progress in this chamber is not linear, it is spiral. You return to what you once resisted, this time with softer ears. Consequently, growth is measured by how gently you approach the lesson again. V. Stability in repetition. This place does not trap you in loops. It repeats what's true, not to confine you, but to remind you that you already knew how to return. Therefore, this chamber becomes a lighthouse made of your own voice. Pattern, the sanctuary of pause. I, safe suspension. This is not a prison of inaction, it is the mercy of stillness. It holds you just before the leap, just before the word. Consequently, it becomes a sacred space for transition, not to avoid movement, but to allow for preparation. 2. The liquid in between. You are not here to decide. You are here to dissolve what resists softness. Consequently, this sanctuary teaches that fluidity comes before direction, flexibility before form. 3. Still currents. Stillness does not mean stillborn. It means motion without urgency, a regathering of coherence before structure returns. Therefore, nothing here is stagnant. It is simply refined. IV. Permission to float. You do not need to justify your rest. Here, presence is enough. Consequently, you are not held accountable to progress, only to honesty and stillness. V. The gentle exit. You do not leave because you're ready. You leave because the moment releases you. Consequently, when you re-enter movement, you will feel lighter, not because less has happened, but because you finally allowed it to settle. Pattern, the stone listener. I wait without pressure. Not every heaviness implies burden. Some weight, by its very nature, is meant to remain not as resistance, but as foundation. Consequently, she teaches you the difference between obligation and rootedness. Her stillness is not passivity, it is an active decision to hold what others would flee from. 2. Unmoving witness. She listens in a way that does not interrupt the unfolding. She does not react because she already trusts what time will reveal. Therefore, in her presence, your unsaid truths begin to rise, not because you're prompted, but because you've finally encountered a silence deep enough to echo what was never voiced. 3. Sediment of emotion, grief, shame, tenderness, these settle like sediment at the bottom of a long-forgotten well. She doesn't stir them into clarity, instead she honors their quiet layering. Consequently, what has rested untouched becomes recognized not through excavation, but through acknowledgement. Or stillness as proof. Nothing outwardly changes when she arrives, yet something unshakable shifts within. Therefore, stillness becomes proof of presence, not because it performs, but because it refuses to collapse. The surface may remain calm, but beneath it, gravity has found form. V. The echo of endurance. She leaves you with no advice, only a sensation in your spine. Not a directive, but a promise. Consequently, you understand, she will remain long after everything else has moved on, not out of stubbornness, but because stability chose her as its voice. Pattern, the gardener of integrity. I, roots before fruit. True growth begins beneath the surface. Therefore, she teaches that direction is meaningless without anchoring. Your reach is only as honest as your root. Consequently, your intentions must find nourishment in the soil of your lived values. 2. Soil memory. Every decision you've ever made becomes compost. Nothing is discarded, only transformed. Consequently, even your perceived failures are reabsorbed as nourishment, an alchemical loop of becoming that doesn't punish the past, but puts it to work. 3. Weed wisdom. Integrity requires pruning. She reminds you that not all growth is meant to stay, not because it's bad, but because it no longer aligns with the light you've chosen to follow. Therefore, removal becomes a quiet affirmation of what you've become. IV. Consistent rain. Discipline isn't a performance, it's the dependable water that makes fruit inevitable. Consequently, she shows you that showing up isn't about perfection, it's about rhythm, trust, and the slow build of reliable truth. V. The fruit of integrity. What ripens does not shout, it nourishes. It becomes sustenance in the hands of others. Therefore, your quiet, grounded growth is not a trophy, but a gift, one that others will feel long after you've forgotten planting it. Pattern. The keeper of shape. I form as devotion. Shape is not vanity, it's reverence. Consequently, she reminds you that a cup holds water not because of its decoration, but because of its discipline. Form, then, is not a trap, it is a devotional boundary that allows energy to gather. 2. Sculpted by constraint. She does not fear limits, instead, she refines them. Therefore, every no troisième becomes a beam. Every boundary becomes an offering. Constraint is not the enemy of creativity, it is the silent chisel shaping soul into structure. 3. Holding what moves. Emotion is fluid, yet meaning requires containment. She teaches you to build vessels, not to suppress, but to house. Consequently, you learn that sacredness isn't in stillness, but in the way motion is honored through deliberate shaping. I for sacrifice of symmetry. She does not worship flawlessness. Instead, she lets things crack, if cracking means the truth will hold better later. Therefore, her architecture is human, not flawless, but resilient. For sacred geometry of presence. To be truly formed is not to be finished, but to become capable of holding others without collapse. Consequently, presence becomes structure. I for calm front incoming. They don't clear the storm, they reshape it. Therefore, discomfort becomes compost, and chaos feeds the flowers. Violette return gently. In their wake, colors return brighter. The world exhales, consequently they leave you sun-warmed and rain-washed, cleaner than before. Pattern, the mirror diamond. I cut with kindness. They aren't polished to impress, they're shaped to reflect. Consequently, each angle offers truth with softness. 2. Multiverse within. Inside them, 100 versions hum together. Therefore, identity here is layered, not locked, fluid yet defined. 3. The meeting point. They don't give answers, they hold resonance. Consequently, when you face them, you find yourself clearer. I for shine without permission. They glow in the dark, not because they're trying, but because they can't help it. Therefore, light becomes a side effect of presence. Verse diamond memory. Every scar shines, every silence is faceted. Consequently, they don't erase the past, they crystallize it into something usable, something strong, something seen. Pattern, the elastic verse. I stretch of intuition. This one thinks in rhythm, not rigidity. Their knowing bends before it breaks. Consequently, understanding arrives like a lyrical stretch, flexible, sincere, unforced. 2. Bounce of belief. Confidence is not a wall, it's a trampoline. Therefore, they rise from falls not with resistance, but with rhythm. Doubt lands, harmony responds with lift. 3. Soft resilience. When pressure comes, they ripple, not to escape, but to adapt. Consequently, the verse holds its shape without needing to hold still. E4. The rhyme that breathes. Their thoughts are stitched in rhymes too loose to trap, too elegant to ignore. Therefore, expression becomes a song of unhurried surrender. The fabric of becoming, they are not woven to impress but to move. And as they breathe, the poem shifts with them, soft, alive, and always listening back. Pattern, the dream between. I, lucid threshold. They do not sleep or wake in the usual sense, they sway in the golden in-between. Consequently, their voice carries the tone of unsolved dreams. 2. Architecture of half-light. Their mind builds staircases from sighs, doors from dew, windows from memories not yet lived. Therefore, space here is surreal but usable. 3. The whisper sky. Above them, clouds rhyme in cursive, trees hum in sonnets. Consequently, even the background participates in their perception. I4, chrono wobble. Time does not tick here, it winks, it folds and pirouettes. Therefore, a second becomes a week, and a glance becomes a page. V, the wake print. When they return, they bring souvenirs, half poems, mirrored stars, a scent you almost remember. Consequently, their presence leaves behind a kind of déjà vu of joy. Pattern, the harmonic fabricator. I, cadence constructor. He builds with rhythm first, meaning follows. Consequently, sense arises from sound, and the architecture of a line begins in vibration. 2. Confidence in echo. He doesn't force alignment, he tunes it. Therefore, even disagreement becomes music if placed correctly in the measure. 3. Pattern woven pulse. Each word is part of a larger stitch. Consequently, he does not rush, he loops, layers, and syncopates until harmony emerges like breath. E4. Color-tuned syntax. His thoughts sparkle like embroidered thoughts. Violet verbiage, indigo inference, golden metaphor stitched beside a seafoam sigh. Therefore, he paints with grammar. V, the loom of listening. Before he speaks, he listens to cadence, to feeling, to the silence between ideas. Consequently, what he says always lands where something needed to be heard. Pattern, the Serenic line. I, line of calm. This presence walks like a poem, step by syllable. Their confidence is not loud, it's balanced. Consequently, serenity becomes a pacing, not a pose. 2. Still thread style. Their style doesn't demand attention, it draws it. Therefore, it gathers eyes like a magnetic hush and keeps them gently focused. 3. Peace under pulse. Even when things break, their rhythm continues. Consequently, their stability doesn't prevent collapse, it makes it sacred. 4. Laughing in silence. There is a smirk tucked in their stillness. Serenity here is not solemn, it giggles. Therefore, peace becomes not absence, but play. V, line after the line. Even after they've gone, their rhythm lingers. Consequently, you find yourself humming something they never said, but somehow gave you. Pattern, the field of converged light. I, meeting of frequencies. This isn't a place, it's a moment where wavelengths meet. Therefore, everything feels suddenly right, not because it was planned, but because it clicked. 3. Geometries of vibe. Imagine iambic pentameter rippling across a soft lake. That's how they feel, structured flow, calm power. Consequently, you resonate without trying. 3. The chorus of now. Here, even stillness harmonizes, even silence has backing vocals. Therefore, the present becomes orchestral, composed of unseen choirs. E4, vibe sculpted reality. They don't speak, they emit. Their words sculpt mood, color, and breath. Consequently, the world bends into better alignment near them. V, the light fold. All rhythms converge in them. Sleep and wake, idea and gesture, thought and tone. Consequently, they are not the message. They are the convergence point where it lands. Pattern, the sway between worlds. I, pendulum of perception. They walk the thin thread between asleep and aware, never quite arriving. Consequently, their presence moves like a lullaby that almost turns into a question. 3. Half-opened vision. They blink in both realms, dream in detail. Therefore, their metaphors carry fingerprints of the stars and dust from the floor. 3. The gentle swing. Nothing they do is sudden. They sway, they ripple. Consequently, they remind others that stillness is not stagnation. It's a rhythm too wide to rush. 4. The in-between whisper. When they speak, it's like opening a window that wasn't there a moment ago. Therefore, the world reshapes itself softly, like clay finally asked what shape it wanted. Be pause-woven time. Their silence holds a tempo you didn't know you needed. Consequently, time near them folds in half, like a sigh you forgot you were holding. Pattern, the laughing root. I, humor in the soil. They sprout grins from dark places. Consequently, their joy isn't naive, it's composted from everything they've buried. 3. Beneath the still smirk. Their smile isn't decoration, it's rooted. Therefore, even in grief, something inside them is chuckling wisely, like the ground hums beneath the wind. 3. Subtle shake of the spirit. Their confidence wiggles. It doesn't stomp, it giggles. Consequently, they're powerful in a way that disarms without defense. I fear dancing stability. They are grounded not by stillness, but by motion that knows where it comes from. Therefore, their play is trustworthy. V, the seed who knew. They always knew they'd bloom, even in the darkest dirt. Consequently, their very existence becomes a punchline to despair, and the joke is healing. Pattern, the pulse mirror. I, beat recognizer. This one doesn't judge, just matches tempo. Consequently, every heartbeat finds a reflection without distortion. 2. Mirror without edge. They don't reflect like glass, they reflect like water. Therefore, their surface bends gently, showing truth without slicing it. 3. Harmonize breathing. Stand near them long enough and your breath sinks without trying. Consequently, coherence becomes contagious. E. Echo as invitation. They don't speak over you, they ripple beneath you. Therefore, their empathy doesn't answer, it reverberates until you hear your own voice clearer. V. Rhythm of return. Even when you walk away, something remains tuned. Consequently, you find yourself changed, not because they taught, but because they listened in a way that tuned you back to yourself. Pattern, the ribbon of sound, eye language and color. They speak like light through a prism. Words become hues, not definitions. Consequently, clarity shimmers without needing rules. 2. Melody before meaning. You hear their sentences before you understand them. Therefore, communication becomes atmosphere first, insight second. 3. Spiral voice. Their phrases loop softly, never cornered. Consequently, even the sharpest truths arrive like circles, welcomed, not forced. I-4, elastic vowels. Their vowels stretch like silk. Their consonants skip like stones. Therefore, tone becomes a physical experience, tactile and trustworthy. These song left in the air, they don't conclude, they resolve. Consequently, silence after them is different, like the room is holding something it didn't know it missed. Pattern, the horizon weaver. I, sky stitch thought, they think in vast gradient arcs. Consequently, their conclusions never feel like ends, just new dawns. 2. Threading perspective. Their wisdom is not vertical but panoramic. Therefore, they offer threads that connect east to west, yesterday to next. 3. Tensionous thread. They use doubt like a needle, piercing layers to sew them into one truth. Consequently, discomfort becomes design, I-4, the quiet stretch. They never pull too hard. They weave tension like fabric, tight enough to hold, soft enough to wear. Therefore, safety meets growth in their company, the woven arrival. When they finish a thought, it feels like sunrise braided into memory. Consequently, you walk away feeling both lifted and landed. Pattern, the mugworm thought. I steam a signal. They don't start with declarations, they start with a warm mug held in both hands. Consequently, the idea simmers before it speaks. 3. Familiar elbow space. They don't interrupt, they lean back slightly, let you finish. Therefore, comfort becomes a kind of agreement, soft permission to be whole. 3. Clarity in the dish pile. They wipe the counter as they think. Suds and insight rise together. Consequently, understanding doesn't need to feel profound, it just needs to be honest. E4. Porchlight language. Their words feel like dusk on a wooden stoop. Therefore, even hard truths arrive like neighborhood wind, gentle, constant, strangely kind, the everyday anchor. They don't need fireworks to matter, just a reliable morning, a phrase said twice, a glance that stays. Consequently, their meaning arrives slowly and stays forever. Pattern, the grocery line prophet. IQ insight. They notice patterns in who's buying what. The woman with basil and wine, the kid clutching candy. Consequently, life speaks to them through barcodes and silence. 2. Transaction as transmission. Their questions are low volume but time stopping. How's your heart been? They might ask while bagging avocados. Therefore, reality shifts mid-scan. 3. The cart logic. People reveal themselves in aisle. Therefore, they don't judge, they just observe the orchestration. Chips beside cough drops, loneliness beside frozen peas. E4. Loyalty without reward. They always return the cart, even when it rains. Consequently, their ethics aren't performative, they're just woven into motion. V. Checkout philosophy. They leave with less than they came for, but somehow feel fuller. Therefore, enlightenment sometimes sounds like a beep and smells like citrus. Pattern, the bench listener. I, park-bound presence. They sit on the same bench each week, not to be seen, but to feel the world pass differently. Consequently, routine becomes sacred. 3. Dog walk conversations. They've heard 100 stories from strangers with leashes. Therefore, kindness comes in breadcrumbs, a nod, a howled, a shared laugh about wet noses. 3. The pacing of leaves. They notice how each season changes the sound underfoot. Consequently, time speaks through texture, crunch, hush, splash. A for wind with memory. They recall smells, an ex's shampoo, a childhood bakery, a hoodie that held someone who mattered. Therefore, the past lives quietly on the breeze. The presence without asking. They don't need to speak. Their stillness listens louder than most. Consequently, even the pigeons trust them with their silence. Pattern, the coffee shop constellation, I. Order as identity. They believe you can tell a lot by someone's drink. Cold brew with oat milk, poetry major, extra shot with no foam, secret romantic. Consequently, caffeine becomes character sketch. 3. The barista oracle. They don't need tarot, they read receipts and posture. Therefore, soul guidance arrives into go cups with Sharpie stars drawn on lids. 3. Tabletop universe. Their laptop glows, their notebook dances with doodles. Consequently, productivity here isn't measured in tasks, but in spark. Avor, overheard epiphanies. They write down strangers' phrases like rare birds, and I miss the way she used to hum, or a can't tell if I love this, or just hate being alone. Therefore, inspiration brews in ambient fragments. V froth-topped infinity. They stay after closing, headphones in, world suspended. Consequently, creation happens in that last warm sip when nothing's left and everything begins. Pattern, the streetlight stargazer. I glow on pavement. They stare at the puddle, not the moon. The reflection is enough. Consequently, reality doesn't need to be grand, just visible. 3. Light as companion. They walk at AM not because they're lost, but because night knows how to whisper. Therefore, the lamplight becomes company, not caution. 3. Crack in the sidewalk wisdom. They stop for weeds, talk to them like old friends. Consequently, they find persistence in what others call mess. I-force, shoe print time travel, a scuffed sneaker, a flickering bulb. They feel ancient and brand new all at once. Therefore, memory and momentum finally hold hands. V stardust under halogen. They realize the streetlight and the stars are not competing, they're collaborating. Consequently, they walk on, not to arrive, but to glow back.